Hey everyone, Pastor Tim here. Glad to have you with us as we're worshiping together once again here at Community of Grace Lutheran Church, coming to you from our campus in Peoria, Arizona. I am just back from Israel, and I would like to tell you I'm back fresh from Israel, but came down with a little bit of a head cold. It's kind of like that t-shirt you get. My grandparents went to Israel, and all I got was this t-shirt. Pastor Tim went to Israel, and one of the things he got was a little bit of a cold. It's not COVID, it's just a cold. But don't worry, I am on Dayquil, so I am ready to go and excited to join you. We actually flew in yesterday morning, Friday morning, got in about 9 o'clock in the morning. Jan and I went to bed at 6 o'clock in the evening, and I slept until 7 o'clock the next morning. So at least I got enough sleep, and excited to be with you to share God's good news with you today. Edwin McManus is the pastor of Mosaic Church in Hollywood, California. And because of where they're located, much of their ministry takes place with those who are in the entertainment industry. And one of the commitments that they've made to each other as a congregation was that they would not exploit where they are, they would not exploit celebrities to try to build their church. So they have a policy that they will not interview celebrities during their worship service. But one day, a friend of Edwin's came to him and asked if he might be interested in interviewing Ben Affleck, who had a brand new movie coming out at that point called The Way Back. And right away, Edwin said, no, it's our policy. We will not interview celebrities. We don't want to look like we're taking advantage of them to grow our church. But his friend was persistent. And after a while, Edwin began to think about it and was intrigued. He thought that maybe the movie was a great art-imitating life story. Ben had been in the news a lot of times with some very public broken relationships, some public addictions, alcoholism, and thought that might be interesting to talk about. And he also assumed that Ben Affleck was an atheist and thought that would be intriguing to have a conversation publicly with this well-respected actor who was also, at least in Edwin's mind, an atheist. So he said yes. And right away, Ben Affleck's agent called to set the ground rules. And the agent said, you can't talk about Ben's relationships, you can't talk about his addictions, you can't talk about religion or faith. And all that left really was for Edwin to talk about the movie, and he said, this is why we don't do this. We're not going to promote his movie. And he almost said no, but then he got that gut check, and he decided to go for it. And he brought Ben out, and immediately Ben began to talk about the topics he wasn't supposed to talk about, according to his agent. And eventually they came around to the topic of faith. And while Ben doesn't identify with any particular religion, he did claim to be a person of faith. And here's why. This is an excerpt from Edwin's book that included that conversation. This is Ben Affleck. He said, what I find that's so powerful is, really moving and compelling, the idea that God, that Jesus loves us and forgives us. All of us. Everybody. All the people that you know, that you think are great, and all the people that you want to judge and be angry at. Really, it's God setting an example for us for how we might be. He went on to say, there are people I have a lot of resentments for and are hard for me to forgive, so I carry a grudge. They did this to me, so on and so forth. Someone said at church, that's like taking poison and hoping someone else will die. You're holding on to this anger, and that forgiveness is really a gift to the person who is able to forgive. To be able to let that go is actually a tremendous gift to the self. In the end, he said, the hardest person to forgive had been himself. I regret things that I wouldn't necessarily do differently, but I regret that it happened. I'm a child of divorce. I think it was right for my mother to ask my father to move out when I was 11. He had a lot of problems. He wasn't able to handle being a father. I had a different story in my own marriage, but I think we came to a judicious, healthy decision for us. And yet the regret that's there is because I know that I have caused pain to my children. So even choices that you think are okay, this is the right, positive choice. It's thought out and constructive, can leave you with a lot of pain and regret. But when it comes down to forgiveness, if God can forgive me, maybe I can forgive myself. Now, what Ben Affleck is talking about there is the way of Jesus, the way of grace. It's the way out. It's the way forward. It's the way back. It's the way through. The way of Jesus, the way of grace, is the way of purpose. It gives your life purpose because the way of Jesus says you matter, that you belong to God, that you are forgiven, that you are God's son, you are God's daughter. That's the way of Jesus. Singer Bono from U2 says it this way. It's mind-blowing. It's a mind-blowing concept that the God who created the universe might be looking for company, a real relationship with people. But the thing that keeps me on my knees is the difference between grace and karma. You see, at the center of all religions is the idea of karma. You know, what you put out comes back to you. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, or in physics, in physical laws, every action is met by an equal or opposite one. It's clear to me that karma is at the very heart of the universe. I'm absolutely sure of it. And yet, along comes this idea called grace to upend all that as you reap you will sow stuff. Grace defies reason and logic. Love interrupts, if you like, the consequences of your actions, which in my case is very good news indeed, because I've done a lot of stupid stuff. That's between me and God. But I'd be in big trouble if karma was going to finally be my judge. I'd be in deep doo-doo. It doesn't excuse my mistakes, but I'm holding out for grace. I'm holding out that Jesus took my sins onto the cross because I know who I am, and I hope I don't have to depend on my own religiosity. The point of the death of Christ is that Christ took on the sins of the world so that what we put out did not come back to us, and that our sinful nature does not reap the obvious death. That's the point. It keeps us humbled. It's not our own good works that get us through the gates of heaven. It's grace. That's the way of Jesus. It's the way of grace. It's the way of hope. It's the way of forgiveness. It's the way of life. It's the way that can change your life. During World War II, there was a battle that had taken place outside of a French village, and an American soldier lost his life in that battle. And before moving on, his friends wanted to make sure that he got a proper burial, and they remembered seeing a little church with a graveyard, and it had a white picket fence around it, and they thought they would take him there and see if they could bury their friend there before they left. So they carried their friend about a mile, and they got to the church, and they knocked on the door. The priest's English wasn't all that great, but he understood that they were asking if they could bury their friend in his graveyard at the church. And the priest said, "No, I'm sorry, but we can only bury people here who are of the faith of this church." Well, the men turned to go, and they were very discouraged, and the priest could see that, and he said, "Wait a minute. How about if you bury him just outside of the fence?" And so that's what they did. It was late at night, it was dark, they buried their friend, and they didn't have the chance to say their final farewells, so they came back early the next morning to do so. But when they got to the church, they couldn't find the body. They couldn't find the grave. And so they knocked on the door of the priest's house, and he came out, and they said, "We buried our friend late last night. We can't find the grave. Can you help us out? Do you know where he is?" And the priest's face lit up with a smile, and he said, "Yeah, I know where he is. Follow me." And as they were following him, he said, "I couldn't sleep last night, and so I got up during the middle of the night, and I moved the fence." That's the way of grace. That's the way of Jesus. Through his death and resurrection, Jesus moves the fence so that it includes you. The way of grace is that you are loved, you are forgiven, you matter, that your life has purpose because of Jesus. Here's how Paul says it. He's writing to his friends in the church at Corinth, and he says, "You know the generous grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. Though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that by his poverty he could make you rich." Jesus, through the generosity of his grace, comes to make you rich in life, in hope, in purpose. And so Jesus comes to you today with this profound invitation to follow him in the way of his life, to follow him in the way of grace, the way of gratitude, the way of goodness, the way of giving. because it's the way of Jesus that gives your life purpose. And that invitation comes to you through two powerful words: follow me. A couple days ago, I was with our tour group. We were in the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem. It's just outside the city of Jerusalem. We don't know if that's where Jesus was buried or not, but it looks like it could be the place. And right next to it is an old stone quarry where they would have done crucifixions, and carved into the rock there is what looks like a skull. And then you just walk a few feet away, and there's a garden with a tomb there, and you see the empty tomb. And we had a chance to worship. And during worship, we talked about that moment of grace, the way of Jesus, where his grace became visible through his death and his resurrection. And we had the chance to sing as believers in Jesus about the way of Jesus, and we sang together, Amazing Grace. And since it's kind of hard for us to sing together, I thought, why not get one of the best to sing it for us? So here's our friend, B.J. Thomas.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that